We talked about how I don't really care about stolen cars from 1980 in Colorado, but we do care about a young woman in Colorado in 1980. And we want to show you a picture of her and see if you recognize her.
Gotcha. I think I want to turn you now.
We actually do have a warrant for your arrest for first-degree murder and kidnapping.
For what?
First-degree murder and kidnapping of Helene
You got the
Pruszynski.
wrong guy.
We actually have your DNA in her and on her.
This is James Clanton, 62 years old, a truck driver living in Lake Butler, Florida, completely convinced that the worst thing waiting for him that morning was a fraud investigation he had nothing to do with. He was wrong, because 40 years ago, a young woman named Helene Pruszynski got off a bus 3 blocks from home, and James Clanton had a knife. But before we get to that interview room, before we get to the beer mug that unraveled 40 years of silence, we have to understand something about why it took this long, because this was never just a cold case. This was a system failure. And it started not in 1980. It started in 1975. Her name was Helene Pruszynski. She was 21 years old, the youngest of 3 children, the baby of the family. Her father, Chester, called her that every day of his life. And right up until the day he died, she had grown up on Long Island, followed her family to Massachusetts in her early teens, and arrived at Wheaton College in Norton with the kind of energy that makes people remember you. She was in the school's singing group, by invitation. She had a voice people remembered. A friend from high school described her as such a piece of heaven, an all-American, intelligent, caring individual. Her supervisor at the radio station where she interned, a man who'd known her for barely 2 weeks, remembered her laugh. He said she was very bright with a great sense of humor. He said she made an immediate impression. The station was KHOWAM, Denver, the news department. It was January 1980, her senior year at Wheaton, and Helene had moved to Englewood, Colorado to do real journalism, to be in a newsroom, to see how it worked, to find out if she could belong there. She was staying with her aunt and uncle, approximately 3 blocks from her bus stop. Her college friend Kitsy Snow was with her. She had been in Colorado for less than 2 weeks. She was already talking about staying permanently. On the evening of January 16, 1980, Helene finished her shift at KHOW. It was starting to snow. She'd mentioned it to her supervisor, Mike Anthony, said she was a little worried about the commute. He told her, "If you wait 15 minutes, I'll give you a ride home." She thought about it. Then she told him she'd just take the bus. That was the last conversation he ever had with her. 3 blocks. She knew the route. She'd walked it every day. James Clanton didn't materialize out of nowhere. The system had its hands on him for years. It saw exactly what he was, and then it opened the door and let him walk out. In April of 1975, a 17-year-old named Curtis Allen White was arrested in Arkansas and convicted of first-degree rape. He raped a woman at knife point. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He served 4. He was released on parole on March 6, 1979. He was not required to register as a sex offender. Registration requirements of that kind did not exist yet under Arkansas law. His DNA was not collected. No system existed yet to require it. A former counselor from the Southern Christian Home in Arkansas, the institution where Clanton had spent time as a youth, believed he could be rehabilitated. He offered Clanton a home in Acres Green, Douglas County, Colorado, put him in a house, found him work at a landscaping company, and tried to give him a fresh start. The Southern Christian Home, the parole board, the Arkansas criminal justice system. They each had a file on Curtis Allen White. They each made a decision. 9 months after they released him, Helene Pruszynski stepped off a bus 3 blocks from home. But the rage that led him there didn't begin in 1975. It began much, much earlier. Decades later, sitting on a plane on his way back to face justice, Clanton would describe it himself. His words are not an excuse. They are an indictment of every institution that saw this man and decided he was ready to be free.
When I was 8 years old, I started with insects and putting them in red ant piles, and went up to amphibians and went up to small animals. I was 8 years old, I hung a cat in a tree and beat it to death with a tree limb. Couldn't understand why. Where's a kid that old get that kind of rage? And that rage has always stayed with me. I mean, I think every time something hurts me so bad that I can't deal with it, and I learned anger covers up pain. And that was pretty much the basis of everything I've ever done. I was just mad all the time.
Every institution that had a file on Curtis Allen White had decided he was ready to be free. In January 1980, Curtis Allen White was 22 years old, 9 months out of prison, working in the area, on parole, which meant he had a parole officer, which meant he had a mandatory check-in at an office in downtown Denver, which meant that on certain evenings he drove north to Denver and then drove south again, home to Douglas County, right through Englewood. He had a hunting knife in the car, a blade approximately 5 to 6 inches long, retrieved specifically from someone's garage. He had been thinking about what he intended to do with it. He wasn't certain he'd planned it before the parole meeting, but he had the knife, and that night, he was on his way home. At a bus stop on South Broadway in Englewood, Helene stepped off her bus.
Englewood police, also in on the case, have been concentrating their efforts near this bus stop on South Broadway. It's believed that Ms. Pruszynski got off her bus after work here Wednesday night. She was abducted sometime after that.
She had walked about half a block, maybe a block, from the stop, moving toward home, 3 blocks away. She knew the route. She'd walked it every day. He came up behind her, put his arm around her waist. When he had the knife palmed in his hand, pressed against her, he told her to come with him. She complied. He forced her into his vehicle and made her lie on the floor. He drove her to a remote wooden shed and raped her. Then he drove her south, more than 20 miles, into Douglas County, to Daniels Park Road, a 2-lane road through open, snow-covered land. He pulled over near a field. She was wearing only stockings on her feet. He made her walk into the field. Her hands were bound behind her back. In the snow, in January, in Colorado. She begged him to let her go home to her family. He told her he would. He instructed her to get down on her knees. He told her to stay down until she was sure he had driven away. She cooperated. She did exactly what he said, because she was trying to live. She was trying to make it home. She had stayed as friendly as she could from the moment he grabbed her, because she understood in some part of her mind that her survival depended on not making him angry. He acted as if he were leaving. Then he turned back. 9 stab wounds in the back. Both lungs collapsed. She fell where she stood, in that open field, more than 20 miles from the aunt and uncle's home, where Kitsy Snow was already waiting, already watching the clock. He walked back across the snow to his car. He drove away. The following morning, January 17th, 1980, a woman driving along Daniels Park Road noticed a figure in the field. A nearby road worker confirmed what she feared and called law enforcement. Douglas County Sheriff's officers arrived to find a young woman lying on her back in the snow, bound, partially undressed, a green cloth gag around her neck. Investigators cataloged the scene with the tools they had in 1980. They photographed, they collected biological evidence. They made a plaster casting of a boot print, size 10, cowboy heel, pressed deep into the mud beneath the snow. And they noticed the footprints. 2 sets led into the field. Only 1 set led back out. A responding deputy who worked part-time at KHOW recognized her. He recognized her blue coat. At 1:30 that afternoon, officers arrived at the aunt and uncle's home in Englewood. Kitsy Snow wrote in her journal, "I couldn't cry, just shake. I couldn't stop shaking." When Helene's parents arrived from Massachusetts, Chester and Henrietta, who had driven through the night, they were met at the door by a priest. They knew. Henrietta Pruszynski cried out, "No, no, not my baby." Chester Pruszynski, who had always called his youngest daughter baby every day her whole life, would carry the guilt of letting her go to Colorado until the day he died.
As snow began to fall in the field where the body of young Helene Pruszynski was found, obliterating any clues, authorities called off their search of the area.
The snow came down. It covered the tire tracks. It softened the footprints. It worked against every investigator who had driven out to that field that morning, hoping to find something, anything, that would tell them who had done this. Within hours of her death, the landscape itself was cooperating with the man who had killed her. The biological evidence was preserved, the plaster casting was preserved, the DNA was there, waiting. But the technology to read it, to match it to a name, to reach across decades and drag a man back to answer for what he'd done, that technology was still 17 years away. And in the meantime, Curtis Allen White had a long head start. The investigators worked every angle, canvassed the neighborhood, chased the tips from the $10,000 reward that KHOW management had posted. Got nothing back. What they had was a composite sketch. White male, early 20s, brown hair parted to one side, a mustache. Drawn with the help of a witness who had seen a man and a vehicle parked near Daniels Park Road that night. The witness underwent hypnosis to pull out more detail. The sketch went out to the public. It generated no confirmed leads. Then the false confessions started. Two men came forward separately, both claiming to have killed Helene Pruszynski. Both were eliminated. They couldn't provide the details that only the actual killer would know. In 1983, the case attracted a different kind of attention. Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, two men who had confessed to hundreds of murders across the country, almost none of which they actually committed, claimed the Pruszynski killing as theirs. Investigators interviewed them. Same result. They didn't know what had happened in that field. They were ruled out. And then, nothing. The case went cold. The file was there, the evidence was there, the DNA was there, preserved, waiting for a technology that didn't yet exist and wouldn't for nearly 2 more decades. And James Clanton was already driving south toward Florida. For the next 20 years, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He changed his name, found a new state, and simply waited to see if anyone would ever find him. For a very long time, no one did. 2 years after the murder, that Curtis Allen White walked into a Florida courthouse and filed the paperwork to become a different man. He chose a new name, James Curtis Clanton. He remarried, he had a daughter. He settled into a life in Florida, driving trucks, living on a farm property in Lake Butler, a small community in Union County in the north of the state. He would describe, decades later, that he thought about Helene constantly, that his conscience never let him go. He said he raised his daughter to be the opposite of the way he was raised. He raised a daughter. Helene Pruszynski never got to do any of the things that come after 21. The case stayed open in Denver, but open is not the same as active. Helene's family carried it the way families carry these things, in all the ordinary moments that should have been ordinary. Her father, Chester, blamed himself for letting her go to Colorado. He'd been proud of her for getting that internship. He'd encouraged it. That pride had nowhere to put itself after January 1980, and it curdled into something that never fully left him. In 2005, on the 25th anniversary of Helene's murder, her sister Janet Johnson and a group of Helene's friends flew back to Colorado. They walked the route Helene had taken on the night she was killed. They carried flyers with her photograph. They asked if anyone knew anything, if anyone remembered anything from that night in January 1980. They walked all the way to the field. No one came forward. In 1998, investigators had been handed a new tool. The CODIS National DNA Database had launched. Edens and the Douglas County team had already done the work. They had developed a DNA profile from the biological evidence collected at the scene in 1980 and entered it into the system. They waited. No match came back, because James Clanton had never been in CODIS. His 1975 rape conviction in Arkansas predated the DNA collection protocols that would have flagged him. And in 1998, the same year, investigators entered Helene's killer's DNA profile into the national database. Clanton was arrested in Florida for domestic violence. His fingerprints were taken. His photograph was taken. That 1998 photograph, when investigators eventually compared it to the 1980 composite sketch, was described as nearly identical. Same hair, same mustache, same face. The man investigators had been hunting was fingerprinted and photographed in 1998. And then he walked out of the Florida booking process with no DNA sample collected. No one connected the dots. There weren't any dots to connect. Not yet. In 2009, Chester Pruszynski Jr., Helene's brother, Chet, died at 63 years old. He never knew who had killed his sister. In 2012, both of Helene's parents died. Chester Pruszynski, who had called his youngest daughter baby every day of her life, died not knowing. Henrietta Pruszynski, who had cried out at the door in Englewood, "Not my baby," died not knowing. 3 of Helene's 4 immediate family members went to their graves carrying an open wound. Only Janet Johnson was still here, and the snow that had fallen on Daniels Park Road in January 1980 had long since melted. But the evidence underneath it, the DNA, the plaster cast, yet the biological material preserved through nearly 4 decades, was still waiting. In 2015, Douglas County Sheriff Tony Spurlock established a dedicated cold case unit within the department. The Pruszynski file was one of the first cases they pulled. In 2018, Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was identified and arrested after investigators used a public genealogy database to match his DNA to distant relatives. The technique, called forensic genealogy, and didn't require the perpetrator to ever have had their DNA collected by law enforcement. It only required one thing: that someone in their biological family had voluntarily uploaded their DNA to a public database. Working with forensic genealogy firm United Data Connect, the Douglas County team took the DNA profile developed from Helene's crime scene evidence, a profile that had been sitting in a case file for 37 years, and uploaded it to GED Match. They got more than 3,000 familial matches. Somewhere in that database, a relative of the man who had killed Helene Pruszynski had spit into a tube and mailed it to a genealogy company, curious about their ancestry. Detective Shannon Jensen of the Cold Case Unit spent months building a family tree by hand. Not an algorithm, a detective, working backward through records, newspaper clippings, family documents, finding the connections one branch at a time. She identified a woman named June Estes as the probable biological mother of the killer. June Estes had passed away by the time investigators located her in the records. But she had 4 sons. The 2 younger ones were too young. They would have been children in 1980. The 2 older ones, born in the 1950s, were the focus. And then Jensen found the article, a newspaper article about a family reunion. It listed the sons' names, William White and Curtis Allen White. William White's DNA was already in CODIS. Investigators ran the comparison. Near match, not exact, which meant one thing: the killer was his brother. Curtis Allen White, born 1957, last known address, Florida. And then investigators found the name change records. Curtis Allen White had filed in 1982 to legally become James Curtis Clanton. He was in Lake Butler, Union County, Florida. He was 62 years old. He drove trucks. He lived on a farm. He had, by all appearances, spent 40 years being a completely unremarkable man. Investigators tracked him to a local bar. They watched him drink his beer. They waited for him to stand up and walk out. Then they took the glass. December 4th, 2019. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation confirmed the DNA from the glass against the profile developed from the 1980 crime scene evidence. Exact match. A warrant was issued for the arrest of James Curtis Clanton for the first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping of Helene Pruszynski. 40 years later. A beer mug in a Florida bar. That's what it took. On the morning of December 11th, 2019, investigators drove to Clanton's trailer in Lake Butler. They had a cover story ready. They were looking into a financial fraud case where his identity may have been compromised. He was cooperative. He was relaxed. He confirmed his name change, confirmed he had lived in Colorado in 1980. He had no idea.
We talked about how I don't really care about stolen cars from 1980 in Colorado, but we do care about a young woman in Colorado in 1980. And we want to show you a picture of her and see if you recognize her.
Gotcha. I think I want to turn now.
Notice the pause before "No, sir." He understood exactly what photograph they were about to show him. On the flight that followed, he would tell investigators he thought about Helene constantly, that his conscience, he said, had never let him go. He knew exactly who she was the moment the detective mentioned a young woman in Colorado in 1980. 2 days later, on the extradition flight from Florida to Colorado, Clanton waived his right to wait for counsel and agreed to talk. For 6 hours, somewhere over the country he'd lived in, unchallenged for 4 decades, he talked.
Did you recognize, when you saw the picture, did you know who that was? The other day when the detective put it on the table?
It's been a long time, but yes.
He described raising his daughter to be the opposite of the way he had been raised. The opposite, he said, of everything he knew himself to be. He said he had thought about Helene when his daughter was born. He said he had thought about what she had deserved and never gotten. None of this was remorse enough to call the police in 1980. None of it was remorse enough to call in 1990 or 2000 or 2010. His conscience had sat with him for 40 years, and he had simply lived around it. He then described in detail what had happened on the night of January 16, 1980. He described the drive. He described the shed. He described Daniels Park Road. And he described, with a specificity that made investigators go quiet, how Helene had behaved throughout all of it.
When you stabbed her in the field and left her there, did you pose her body at all? Did you like lay her the way she was laying, or did you okay, so you just stabbed her and walked away?
Yes.
Okay. And you said she never cried, she was nice to you the whole time?
Yes.
When you stabbed her, did she ask you why, or did she just...
I don't think she expected me to, because I told her to get down on her knees. And then I told her, I said, don't get up until you know I'm gone. And that's when everything else went a totally different way.
She was bound, barefoot in the snow, more than 20 miles from anyone who was looking for her. And she was being kind to the man who had taken her there, because she was trying to live. She was calculating, in whatever part of her mind was still calculating. He thought that her best chance was to not make him angry, to comply, to give him no reason. It didn't matter. He killed Helene Pruszynski because he was afraid she would report him to police and send him back to prison for rape. That was the reason, not rage, not a moment that escaped his control, a calculation. He was afraid of the consequences, so he turned back.
Yes.
Why did you go to Englewood to do this? Why didn't you do it in Douglas County by where you live? Why did you go to Englewood?
I was on my way home from my parole officer.
The system designed to supervise his reintegration into society, the mandatory check-in, the parole officer, the condition of his release, had put him on the road through Englewood that night. He drove north to Denver to meet his parole officer. He drove south through Englewood on the way home. At some point on that drive, he stopped at the garage and retrieved the knife he had been thinking about. And then he turned onto South Broadway and saw Helene step off her bus. Investigators also pressed him about a report of an attempted assault 10 minutes before Helene's abduction, a few blocks up the street. Clanton said he passed a woman on the sidewalk but didn't approach her. The investigators noted it. The record is incomplete. Then investigators turned to the evidence from the crime scene, the boot prints cast in plaster, size 10, cowboy heel, sitting in an evidence locker since January 1980. 39 years. The plaster cast had been waiting 39 years for that sentence. And then Lieutenant Tommy Barella, the investigator who had worked this case for the past year and helped build it piece by piece, asked the one question no evidence could answer.
What made Helene the right target?
Fate.
Fate. She was there. That was the entire answer. She stepped off her bus, and she was there, and he was driving by, and that was the whole of it. And no reason, no specific thing she had done or said or was. The system had failed her, and the man the system had failed to contain had driven past her stop at the wrong moment, and she had decided to take the bus instead of waiting 15 more minutes. And the word for all of that, the word he chose 40 years later on a plane, was fate. She was 21 years old. She had been in Colorado for less than 2 weeks. The arrest was announced publicly. More than 22 detectives had worked the case across state and federal lines in the prior year alone. On February 21st, 2020, Clanton pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. His plea eliminated the need for a trial. On July 1st, 2020, more than a dozen people testified at the sentencing hearing in a proceeding that lasted nearly 3 hours. Kitsy Snow, Helene's friend who had been waiting at the house that night in January 1980, who had written in her journal, "I couldn't stop shaking," read those journal entries aloud in the courtroom 40 years later. A friend told the court, "When you were in the company of Helene, you knew that the world was good. That was taken away from all of us." Douglas County Judge Teresa Slade sentenced James Clanton to life in prison. She addressed him directly. She told him, "You have had the benefit of a life and a family, things you took away from Helene. Under Colorado law, as it applied to crimes committed in 1980, not 2020, but 1980, the year the crime occurred, Clanton is eligible for a parole hearing after serving 20 years. His first parole eligibility falls around 2040. The same legal framework that released him from the Arkansas prison in 1979 after 4 years of a 30-year sentence governs how long he stays behind bars today. That is not an accident. That is the architecture of the system. Since his conviction, investigators have continued examining whether Clanton committed other sexual assaults or murders in the years he spent free. As of now, he has been definitively linked only to Helene. Chester Pruszynski never knew. Henrietta Pruszynski never knew. Chet Pruszynski Jr. never knew. The only member of Helene's immediate family who lived to see this day was her sister Janet. She was a new mother when Helene was murdered in 1980. She was in her 70s when Clanton entered his plea. The prepared statement and the sidewalk, two versions of the same 40 years. The one she held herself together for, and the one where she didn't have to anymore. But when reporters followed her outside, she said something that didn't fit the shape of a resolution. 3 of Helene Pruszynski's 4 immediate family members died waiting for an answer. It arrived 40 years too late for any of them to hear it. The man who killed her has a parole hearing scheduled, eventually, under the same laws that decided 4 years was enough the first time. And a 21-year-old journalism student who loved the Red Sox and had already started thinking about staying in Colorado forever never got to find out what came next. That is not a cold case solved. That is the full weight of what it costs when the system gets it wrong. Finally, after 40 years, written down. If this case stayed with you, there are others that don't make the headlines. Cases where the same failures are still compounding in real time, and the families are still waiting. The next one is already there.